Howdy and welcome to the podcast. This is Untold Tales from this side of nowhere, and I am your host, Connor Jones, here to share with you a little bit of information today. I know I usually just tell a story, but today's episode's going to be a little bit different, so hang on and get ready for the ride. This week's episode is sponsored by Basins Market, located in Basin, Wyoming. Basins Market is your destination for groceries, fresh produce, and the best meat department in the Bighorn Basin. Come on in and sample their wide selection of products Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Sundays from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. They've got a lot of great sales this weekend in preparation for the big day. Thanksgiving's coming up, and I'd invite you to go on into Basin and find some of those staples for your Thanksgiving dinner. We're also sponsored by the Wyoming Welcome Program. The Wyoming Welcome Program distributes Wyoming Welcome baskets to new residents of Park County. These baskets are filled with advertisements, coupons, and promotions for local businesses that help new move-ins get an idea of what's available here in Park County. So, if you would like to be included in one of these baskets and get your business name out, go ahead and contact the folks at the Wyoming Welcome Program by shooting an email to HaleyJ, that's HALEYJ, at WyomingWelcome.com. And now, the podcast. Today, we're talking about Wyomingisms, which may be a term that I have coined myself. It won't be the first time that I've coined a term on the podcast, but Wyomingisms are terms that are specific to Wyoming. So, we're going to be jumping in and talking about the jargon, some of the colloquialisms that you find in Wyoming. Let's face it, Wyoming is different from basically every other state in the Union. While it's part of kind of a trio of Rocky Mountain states, I would say Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming in a lot of ways are very similar to each other. There's just something different about a state where there are more cows than people. Wyoming is still the least populated state in the United States, and the Cowboy State does things its own way. So today we're going to be talking about Wyomingisms. I've titled this essay, Wyomingisms, a sort of complete list. So here goes. The other day, my mom told me that when she got in her car to head to work, her navigation system told her there was light traffic between Otto and Basin. She had never received a notification like that before, and she thought that Toyota may have pushed out a software update or something. So she set off on the 15-minute drive, keeping an eye out for the light traffic she had been warned about. She drove from the house 5 miles into Otto and didn't see a single vehicle on the road. She turned on the highway and headed east. Finally, about 5 minutes outside of Basin, she passed a single car heading in the opposite direction. I guess that's what constitutes light traffic in Wyoming. Light traffic isn't the only thing that's different in Wyoming. For instance, a Wyoming traffic jam is what happens when there are so many cows on the road, no one can get by to feed their own cows. Beyond traffic, terms like the park or winter take on a different meaning in the Cowboy State, and growing up in the least populated state in the Union, there are certain terms with which you become familiar. If you're a visitor, it's possible you've been confused by the colloquialisms Wyoming's residents toss around. So, for the benefit of Wyoming residents and visitors alike, I have compiled a list of Wyomingisms that may be helpful when talking to one of Wyoming's citizens or trying to explain something we say to a visitor. While this is by no means an exhaustive list, it may serve as a good starting point for understanding some of Wyoming's jargon. Wyomingite, a Wyoming citizen. During research for this list, I discovered that the term has also been applied to a volcanic rock found in Sweetwater County. Wyomingites, both the people and the rocks, are tough, may have a few rough edges, endure both heat and cold, and are relatively rare. Unlike the rocks, though, the people are loyal, hardworking, and friendly as long as you mind your P's and Q's and demonstrate some common sense. Common sense. A baseline level of intelligence and ability to make rational decisions. For instance, common sense is knowing that getting within 10 yards of a bison is a bad idea, and wearing shorts anywhere in the Wyoming outdoors will more than likely result in serious damage to your legs. Common sense is also a bit of a misnomer, because if you talk to any Wyomingite, they will probably tell you that it seems to be more the exception than the rule with folks these days. Winter. The months of the year during which the daytime temperatures seldom climb above freezing, and the nighttime lows resemble the balance on that credit card you can't seem to pay off. Winter usually starts in mid to late September and sticks around until late April or early July. Winter is always in the back of your mind in Wyoming, and you spend most of summer preparing for winter. Summer. The 3 months of the year during which daytime temperatures average in the 80s, but can climb into the triple digits once or twice, just to keep you on your toes. Summer in Wyoming can begin in mid to late June or early July and runs through August. Spring. A fictitious season in which the ground thaws and plants begin poking their heads through the soil. It has been rumored that spring starts in late February or even early March in other parts of the United States, but someone forgot to tell Wyoming about it. Spring break. A week-long break from school that most Wyoming schools observe in March. During spring break, winter comes back with a vengeance and reminds everyone that there's no such thing as spring in Wyoming. In the city of Powell, the swimming pool closes for deep cleaning the week after spring break because all the students who are not in school go swimming and watch the blizzard raging outside, fantasizing about what it must be like to live in a place where spring actually exists. Fall. The day of the year when all the leaves get blown off the trees in the first really good windstorm of winter. Fall usually happens sometime in early October. Opening day. The first day of deer season, opening day is an unofficial holiday during which schools, banks, and the occasional hospital are closed because everyone calls in sick with buck fever. Buck fever. An illness that spreads among Wyomingites faster than fire in a match factory. Buck fever is an uncontrollable urge to find and harvest a buck deer, and it is known to afflict large swaths of the population with no regard for age or gender. Hunting is so popular in Wyoming, in fact, that some public schools even offer hunters' safety courses as part of their curriculum. A calm day. A day when the wind blows less than 10 miles per hour. A breezy day. A day when the wind blows around 15 miles an hour. A windy day. A day with sustained winds of 20 to 30 miles per hour. Windsocks stand perpendicular to the poles on which they are hung. Windstorm. A storm with winds above 50 miles per hour. A really good old-fashioned Wyoming windstorm will produce winds that rival most hurricanes, carrying all sorts of debris, dust, sticks, leaves, garbage, cats, and small children, far from their original locations. Once during the winter of 1978, a second grader in Byron named Timmy set out on foot for school. As he walked, the wind picked up a bit and knocked him off his feet. When he finally got to school, he was bewildered when he didn't recognize any of the kids or the teachers, which is unusual in a town of less than 500 people. Come to find out, he had landed in Pinedale, Wyoming, having been blown over at least one major mountain range and a distance of over 100 miles. True story. Calm days are rare in most Wyoming towns. In the town of Cody, Wyoming, where a stiff Chinook comes blowing out of Shoshone Canyon, it's windy about 300 days of the year. As a result, the hometown Cody Broncos football team is always a major contender for the state football title due to their incredible running game. Cody quarterbacks hardly ever throw passes over 15 yards because it's almost impossible to predict where a pass is going to go once it leaves your hand. Furthermore, Cody athletes are incredible runners because they're always running into the wind. In fact, Cody runners are so lost without wind, coaches have to turn on massive industrial fans during the indoor track season to give the tracksters at least a small sense of normalcy. Mountain. How Wyomingites pronounce the word mountain. Somewhere along the way, the N and the T found in the middle of this word got lost and will likely never be found again. Wyoming is home to many mountains, including the Wind Rivers, the Tetons, the Absarokas, the Beartooths, the Pryors, the Owl Creek Range, the Wyoming Range, and my favorite, the Bighorns. The rugged beauty of Wyoming mountains have been inspiring Wyomingites since before the state was founded. Mountains offer vast tracts of wilderness that provide some of the best opportunities for hunting and fishing you'll find anywhere on Earth. Creek. A waterway that flows downhill in a mountainous area. It is smaller than a river, but larger than a creek. See also stream. Wyoming's mountains are crisscrossed by hundreds of creeks, most of which contain fish. Creek. A waterway that flows downhill in a mountainous area and is smaller than a creek. The name is derived from the crick that develops in your neck when tracking a creek's progress on a map. Usually found in very rocky regions, cricks zigzag all over the place like a scared cottontail as they make their way down a mountain. Crickle. A cross between a crick and a trickle. A crickle is usually what runs down a dry creek bed when it is actually running some water. Crickles are like wildflowers. They show up when the snow melts, stick around for a few weeks, and then they dry up. Beating, as in, let's go beating tonight. Beating is a sport unique to Wyoming that involves driving out to one of the massive piles of sugar beets formed each year during the fall harvest and stealing a sugar beet from the top of the mountain of beets. While scrambling to the top of a beet pile in the dark gives Wyoming teenagers a thrill of excitement, it aggravates sugar plant operators to no end. Many beet dumps even employ night watchmen to discourage the rambunctious youngsters. Witty remark. A saying that any of Wyoming's residents might whip out to make someone smile or impart some country wisdom. For instance, if your car breaks down 5 miles outside of town, word will get there before you do. Or, when the cows are out on the pond, you know it's safe to skate. One of my Grandpa Iverson's favorite sayings often appeared when we reached the end of a chore, whether it was shucking corn or stacking firewood. He'd grab the last ear of corn or a log and say, "Well, that's the one we've been looking for. Why don't we start with this one?" Watch out for deer. This is a condescending phrase used by parents who want their kids to drive Wyoming's roads safely. Any proficient Wyoming driver doesn't have to be told to watch out for deer, antelope, elk, bison, raccoons, coyotes, foxes, and a host of other animals that cross Wyoming's highways on a regular basis. Watch out for wildlife, a less condescending phrase usually directed towards someone who's about to drive through the park. It is generally understood that the term wildlife refers to any of the tourists visiting the park who inexplicably forget all traffic laws and common sense once they enter. The park. This is the local term for what others call Yellowstone National Park, 96% of which resides within Wyoming. Founded in 1872, Yellowstone is both the nation's and the world's first national park. Yellowstone attracts huge numbers of tourists each year and is the name of a popular TV show starring Kevin Costner that was actually filmed over 100 miles from the park. The approximately 4 million visitors who go to Yellowstone National Park each year come to see its rich variety of wildlife and more than half the world's geysers. They outnumber the population of Wyoming almost 8-1, but that's fine by us. We love to see tourists come, but we're also fine with our state having more cows than people. Old Faithful. The most famous of the more than 500 geysers in Yellowstone National Park. Old Faithful predictably erupts about every 90 minutes and has been doing so for more than 100 years, thus earning its name. Old Faithful definition B. The nickname bestowed on your childhood car, which predictably broke down around every 90 miles, and had been doing so ever since your parents purchased it for $100 off a neighbor who lives down the road a mile or two. Neighbor. Neighbors are the reliable folks who show up when you get a vehicle stuck in the mud, both to give you a hand and to laugh at you. In a state where people can live more than a mile apart, neighbor is a loose term that can be applied to anyone who lives within a 50-mile radius of you. As a kid growing up on Poverty Flats, our nearest neighbor lived a half-mile away as the crow flies, and a mile as the truck drives. The truck. The vehicle you drive. If you're lucky, it has four-wheel drive and a tailgate. If you're not, then this is your dream vehicle, and referring to that old beater you're driving as the truck constitutes what you hope is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Old beater. The nickname others apply to the old car you drive, as in, you're still driving that old beater? An old beater can be foreign or domestic, but has a minimum mileage requirement that is the subject of some debate among Wyomingites. Some old beaters can get up to 300,000 miles, though I've known others to have as little as 200,000. Most beaters get this moniker from the noise they make when the engine is running, which is comparable to the sound of a baseball in a clothes dryer. I remember visiting Grandma Jones one Sunday afternoon when I heard what I was sure could only have been a tractor with at least 100 horsepower engine approaching. "Who's bringing that tractor over?" I asked Grandma. "What's that?" she asked. "I can't hear you over the sound of that tractor someone just brought over." I lifted the blinds to peek out into the yard, only to find that the source of the banging and growling was none other than my sister Candace approaching in her old beater. It was a 1992 Nissan Sentra with no fifth gear, and the roar of the engine would have put a bulldozer to shame. Suddenly, the roar sputtered out as Candace turned off the car. "Oh, it's just Candace, Grandma," I said, my voice now audible once more. "She's driving the Nissan." "That old beater?" Grandma asked. "I could have sworn it was your Uncle Greg coming up on the tractor." Spinning cookies. Even the oldest beater is capable of spinning a cookie or two. Most people refer to cookies by their other name, donuts, but spinning cookies is a common term among Wyomingites. When Fred and I were about 16, my mom's brother Jeff and his son TJ came out from Washington State to pick up a truck they had purchased off a friend. Naturally, my cousin TJ wanted to take his new ride out for a spin, and he invited Fred and I to come along for the ride. The truck was a Ford that predated the Bush administration, and not the younger one either. We had to shout to one another to be heard above the roar of the engine when we all climbed into the cab. "Where should we go, guys?" TJ asked us, shouting to be heard. "I've got plenty of supplies," he added, pointing to a cup of root beer in the cup holder and a personal pan pizza on the dash. "Any good places we could go mudding or spin some donuts?" "I know some good places there might be mud," Fred offered, also shouting. "But I don't know about spinning donuts. Do you mean spinning cookies?" "Spinning cookies?" TJ asked. "What do you mean, spinning cookies?" "You know," Fred said. "You get going pretty fast driving straight, then you crank really hard on the steering wheel and spin in a circle. Your tires leave a circle on the ground. It's a spinning cookie. Don't they do cookies back in Washington?" TJ laughed. "You're talking about doing donuts." "No, I'm talking about cookies," Fred replied. "We call them cookies in Wyoming." "Well, you guys can call them what you want. I'm calling them donuts." And with that, he jerked hard on the steering wheel and sent the truck into a spin, reducing our supplies by one personal pan pizza. BLM. This is an acronym that stands for the Bureau of Land Management. About 30% of the entire state of Wyoming land falls under the management of this federal department. The BLM was created in 1946, and its stated purpose is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the public lands for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. With this in mind, you can imagine the amazement of Wyomingites everywhere when they read headlines about members of the BLM filling streets and protesting in major U.S. cities. Somehow, this behavior didn't seem in harmony with sustaining the health and productivity of public lands. "Did you hear about the BLM protests?" Aunt Janet asked. We were visiting my aunt's house for a birthday party, and conversation had turned to current events. They started out peaceful, but now there's rioting and looting in all the big cities. "BLM protests?" Mom asked, puzzled. I was confused too. All my previous experience with BLM agents made the idea of them marching through the streets, waving signs and shouting seem ludicrous, let alone rioting and looting. I tried to picture BLM rangers dressed in khaki uniforms, screaming and flipping police cars with flames dancing behind them, and the image just didn't quite check out. "Why would the BLM be protesting?" I asked. "Are they on strike over wages or sage grouse or something?" Aunt Janet started laughing. "It's not the Bureau of Land Management that's protesting. It's Black Lives Matter," she said. "Oh," I replied. "I've never heard of any BLM but the Bureau of Land Management." Aunt Janet smiled. "That's because you live in Wyoming." Well, there you go. A list of Wyomingisms. Like I said, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a good starting point. If you live in Wyoming, then you probably know some more Wyomingisms, and I would love to hear about them. On my Facebook page for Untold Tales, the podcast, you can find our post asking for Wyomingisms. The bit of wisdom about word reaching town before you do comes from our listener, Ellie, who lives in South Carolina. So thanks for giving us that term, Ellie. The term about cows walking on the pond, proving that it's safe to skate, comes from Brenna, who's listening in Colorado. Thank you, Brenna. And my mom threw in that part about light traffic that I started the episode with. So if you have any more Wyomingisms, be sure to add them to our Facebook page or shoot me an email at untoldtalesthepodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you, and as always, it's been great sharing this half hour or so with you, and I look forward to our next episode in a couple of weeks. As always, this has been another Untold Tale from this side of nowhere, where we work twice as hard for half as much and still find time for the important things, like fishing. See you next time, folks.